So, I want to talk about technique. That's why I played that for you, so hopefully you'll listen to me. Because that's actually the first thing that kind of bothers me is that when I watch guitar videos online or something shows up in my feed from a instructor guy or a social media influencer for guitar, I hear a lot of these universal claims where people will say, oh, you have to hold the pick this way if you want to shred. You have to hold it this way, or vice versa. Or, one of these is right or one of them is wrong. This is correct, this is wrong. The reason I take issue with this, there's two main reasons. One is that, A, if you look at all the great virtuoso guitar players out there, they have a total range of techniques. That should prove to you already that it doesn't matter exactly how you hold it or exactly what your technique looks like. You don't need to copy someone else's technique exactly to also be a great player, to also shred alternate picking. Or the second thing I want you to think about is who decides good technique? So generally, the truth is that the people who decide what good technique is are just the people who can play the best. And playing the best really doesn't have anything to do with insight about what's going to work for other people. It shows that you figured out what worked for you, but that's basically all it says. And so I found in my journey that there were so many times I looked up to players and I just listened to them simply because they were professional musicians who could play better than me, who were better at metal guitar. And they would say something that really was just them sharing maybe what worked for them, but they would state it as kind of a universal rule. Oh, well, you have to do it this way. You don't have to do it that way. That's what worked for you. Even now as a guitar teacher, I'm kind of cautious to tell students, oh, you have to play on this leg. You can't play in this position. You have to play classical. Why would I say that when there's dudes who totally shred in this position? Miles Dimitri Baker, right? Why would I say you have to play closed grip when there's dudes who shred in closed grip? Just because I don't use closed grip, it's not a problem. I'm going to say there's not objectively correct technique, but there are objectively good practice principles that can take you to that level of mastery you want, regardless of your technique, regardless of how you hold the pick. And to prove that to you, I'm going to try right now, by not using my usual way I hold the pick, I am going to hold it with my thumb and middle finger. And like most of my life, compared to my thousands of hours of battling, right? Let's see myself. From holding here. So, not the best effort, but for something I never do and should be awkward and uncomfortable and isn't my normal technique, how come I can pull that off? Because that's not about the exact way I'm holding the pick or what finger it's in or those kind of things. And the same applies with all this obsession with picking angle and all that. If anything was possible, the best way to teach someone, I think, would be to somehow plug them into my body and have them experience what it feels like to pick. Because the feeling is the key. The feeling is something you can't really teach someone, right? How it feels to cross the string. How much tension is the right amount of tension? All these kind of things. A big point I want to get across is that good advice for one person is actually bad advice for another person. And this is part of why I've struggled to continue making YouTube shorts and instructional content about guitar, because the more I've taught people guitar for the last few years, I realized that there isn't really a lot of one-size-fits-all approaches. This is why I encourage for everyone to get private lessons with a good teacher, because what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to help you diagnose and understand what your weaknesses actually are. Because there's some people out there where their barrier to speed isn't so much the physical technique as much as it is their sense of rhythm. I've had a few people like this over the years who have actually quite impressive technique and clearly have been playing for a while, but then you ask them, okay, can you just play eighth notes to a metronome and then play eighth note triplets to a metronome, and they completely fall apart. And you realize that, oh, that is the thing that's hindering them. It's the sense of rhythm. It's a very weird to me, it's an interesting type of barrier you can have. There's some person who needs to actually slow down, right, and clean things up, and that is the correct advice for them. For another person, that's totally not true. They're already playing fast enough. They need to deal with the problems at speed. And in fact, sometimes you can get caught by being told, hey, you have to slow down. When really, no, you need to establish the type of technique you need at the speed, because it's going to feel different than playing at a slower tempo. I also think an important aspect of this is understanding what your technique intuitively wants to be. And this is why great guitar players have different techniques, because I think a lot of them just followed what was intuitively working for them, right? Just because it works for me a certain way doesn't mean I should impose that on everyone, because for some people, it might be intuitive for them. These kind of motions, holding a pick a certain way, using more of the wrist, using whatever it is, it's so minute. These tiny differences, they really matter. But for some people, if they say, okay, I'm just gonna try to copy Gavin's technique and do exactly what he says, I'm holding it the exact way, it could be a much longer and more complicated path than just working with their intuitive approach, what's already comfortable for them, and trying to improve from there. So the building of advanced, crazy shred guitar technique is not something that you can look at the finished product and just emulate that from day one. You have to start simple, right? I love Kevin Heidrich saying that before playing technical death metal, you need to notice how to play death metal. And before playing death metal, you need to have just good standard metal chops. And we could probably even say before that, before you play metal, you might just want standard good rock chops. Of course, you can learn a crazy difficult song right away if you want. You'll have to take it slow. But the point is that sometimes the right path is changing things one step at a time. And this has absolutely been my journey with technique. When I tried to rush to the end result, sometimes it just didn't work out. And similarly, even though I know now how my technique works currently, I know I couldn't have just jumped to this point in a previous era. I had to first improve it in this way, right? Maybe I struggled with my high E string at a certain time and I just had to like figure out what was going on there. Okay. And then I struggled with a certain type of string change and I had to figure out what was going on there. And then I had to struggle with getting the muting right. But if I tried to solve all three of those problems at once, it would have just been too overwhelming. And I would not have actually developed good technique in any of those three areas. So to give you something concrete and useful from this video, besides just having skepticism towards people who say, this is the exact right technique and the way you need to position your body and such, is to understand some good practice principles that can get any technique, ideally, to the right spot. So the first idea is this concept of chunking. And a lot of people don't understand how far you can take chunking. So for example, if I have some lick, you can literally just choose 4 notes of that at a time. Right, etc., etc. And the point is that you're going to notice which pieces of it you actually are weaker at than other ones. And then you can hammer at those a bunch rather than just doing the whole thing over and over again, which is too complex a thing for our brains sometimes to process, right? So when we're pursuing speed, always a fantastic idea is to make the problem more simple. We can handle simple problems at high speeds. If it's too complex, it gets overwhelming. The second concept is looping. It's crazy how simple this is, but if you're dealing with something very difficult and maybe you're already chunking it, instead of just playing it as like a little tiny burst, you can actually get a lot of gains just from asking your body to fluidly loop it. And this applies for like literally anything. It could be some, again, think of the crazy like shred stuff. I would never recommend somebody do a big scale run right off the bat when they're working on speed stuff. You could start with something maybe like this. Because the point is, if that's super easy, okay, then we can move on, right? But don't try to digest that whole thing fast if looping just a tiny bit of it is already tough. The next tool that's super important is separating the hands. This is something I almost recommend to everybody who I talk to when it comes to leveling up their technique, if they haven't already been doing it. Left hand, legato. Just do hammers and pulls through scales and stuff, like literally pentatonic, doing, you know. It's crazy, the gains that you'll get just from picking only the first note of a string change and just pushing that as fast as you can. It puts all the burden here so that when you're practicing it, there's no unnecessary challenge going on here. It's very focused. Now, when it comes to the right hand, you can do things like working on just lots of notes at once, so like tremolo picking, but getting used to the feeling of a certain amount, like 4, 6, or 8 notes, right? So a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right, you can work through scales. And once you're good with 4s, you can go to 2s. Again, slowly adjusting the complexity as you get more comfortable with it. We start fast, but simple for the right hand. The next practice principle is this idea of comparison. And comparison is all about reminding yourself what something that you can do well, easy, feels like when you're tackling something that's a bit harder, but really, when you think about it logically, shouldn't feel that different. So for example, if we have an exercise of like 4 fingers on the left hand into the next string, you might find that if you change the left hand information, it starts to become a lot harder and maybe even makes your right hand start to act strange. So for example, if instead of doing 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm doing a pattern like 3, 4, 2, 1, I might find that practicing that it feels a lot harder than 1, 2, 3, 4, which is logical. It should be hard for the left hand, but you might notice that your right hand starts tensing up when you do it. And so this is, again, the value of comparison, is that we say, okay, let's do a rep of the one I'm familiar with. To kind of remember what it should feel like over here, you're like, oh yeah, that's easy on the picking hand. And then when I go to, you're like, yeah, let's keep it just as easy. And the final little idea I'm going to give you is the idea of patience. And something that I encourage you to all understand is that there's a difference between establishing technique and mastering technique. So establishing technique is just being able to do it at all. Can you sweep pick at X tempo at all? That's establishing the technique. And with extreme metal stuff and shred stuff, that can be hard enough a problem. So first is just establishing the technique. Can I do this difficult thing? And then it becomes about, can I make this easy? Can I make this comfortable? If you're interested in private lessons, you can message me on Instagram.com/GavinBrooks100. If you're interested in learning music theory focused on rock and metal guitar and you want to know all your scale shapes, I'd recommend checking out my theory course linked in the description. All right, take care.